Hi everyone, welcome to Spotlight. In the studio today we have Bruce Wallace. Bruce is a session musician, he is a producer and a musical director, and he's really good at playing drums. So first of all, Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I see on your Facebook it also says you're a blessed man.
I think I am, yes.
I always have a lot of respect for people that have such positive, ways how they see life and how they look at themselves. Right, so tell us a bit more about yourself. How did you get to where you are now, and how did you start?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I'll keep it short. But in a nutshell, I've been a musical person from as long as I can remember. When I was a very small child, around about the age of 4 or 5 years old, I was already hitting things and making little drum kits and playing to my dad's records. And by the time I was 8 years old, I basically started taking a bit of formal tuition. And throughout my career in school, after school, into the Technikon of Pretoria, I've always been playing, always been involved in musical scenarios, school plays, productions, whatever I could do. And it was my dream and my ambition, obviously, to become a professional musician one day. And I guess that's basically what I became. It started there and just grew, you know.
How did you evolve from being a session musician to becoming a producer, to becoming a musical director, and also doing drums in between and all that?
Good question. The interesting thing is that I was interested in music in its entirety long before I was just interested in just being a drummer or just being a musician. I just loved music. So I just wanted to be involved in the creation of music. I just found my particular avenue that I was able to express myself, and what I found myself to be sort of more naturally good at was playing drums. So that was my passion. But even when I was breaking into the industry as a session musician, around the same time, I was already setting up my own home studio, and I was experimenting with software and trying to record things and being very involved and obviously very interested in all the studios that I'd visit, where I'd be playing on albums, and I'd always be talking to the engineers and seeing what they're doing. And I think, I just obviously for the better part of 2000, 2010, I was just so heavily involved in recording and drumming that I didn't really have time to pursue the producing as on a serious level, I suppose. But as the industry started going down a bit in terms of the amount of sessions and recording due to budget restraints, home studios being set up, so forth and so on, I found myself having more time to get involved in production. And I think that's how I branched into more of the producing side of things. And I think that's more or less.
Very, very interesting. Righty, so I've seen that you've been working with Jason Bradley. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was a spin-off of many years ago, me touring in a band around South Africa, and a very young guy came to me then. He must have been barely in his teenage years, and he was a drummer, and he was inspired by us. And it's funny, many years later, I'm talking like 10 to 15 years later, this guy is starting to make a name for himself in the industry. And when he was looking for somebody to produce his album, he realized he wanted somebody who thought a little bit more out of the local scene, not so local, but more of an international sound, if you will, or a country type of sound. And my name popped up, and he remembered me from those days and just gave me a phone call and just said, "Listen, man, this is what I'm doing. I've just been signed to a label. We're looking for a producer to do the album. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Of course, yes."
Cool. I also see you've been endorsed by Mapex and Zildjian. How did you get those endorsements, and what sort of recommendations could you give some of the youth out there to also,
It's also a very good question. It's not something I actually pursued at all. I remember about 7 or 8 years ago, a lot of guys were just getting all these shop endorsements, this, that, everything. And I found it, I wasn't really that interested in it, to be honest. It wasn't something I felt like I had to get. But then eventually a few people were saying to me, "No, why don't you, speak to some of the companies?" And long story short, I had one of the representatives of Zildjian in South Africa come and speak to me. And we had a chat, and he suggested I put through an application and just sort of list some of my credits, my credentials, what I've done. So I did, and that went overseas, and I was very fortunate to get extremely high level of endorsement. Basically, I got a full international endorsement from Zildjian, and but it was largely to do with the amount of hit records I played on, which were at that stage in the hundreds, albums, several hundred, platinum, gold albums into the 60, 70 albums. So it was quite an impressive resume in terms of, that. So I think they looked at those elements, and that's why I got the award. They awarded me that endorsement level. And then Mapex followed suit, Zildjian drumsticks, and then finally Remo drumheads as well. So I work with those three companies, and I do a lot of promotion for them and workshops and stuff like that as well.
Very cool. For those of you who don't know Bruce that well yet, if you listen to a lot of South African recorded albums, Bruce probably played in it, or he probably recorded or produced it, and you're just everywhere. So would you say that there's a sustainable career in music today in South Africa for people here?
I have to say yes, because obviously I sustain myself and my family doing it. So I put on my Facebook page that I'm a blessed man, because I really do consider myself, it's a huge privilege to be able to do something that you love so much and to be able to make a living out of it. However, I do have to say in the same breath that I think the market these days, and I'm not even just talking about South Africa, but even around the world, is become so diverse that if you don't diversify yourself and put your career into several chapters, so to speak, and be versatile in several areas, it can be quite difficult. So there's not much room to specialize, I would say. You can't just say, I'm just going to be a blah, blah, blah. Especially if if you try to be genre specific as well. And I think that's one of the mistakes I made back earlier. I thought I could just be in one rock band and play rock music for the rest of my life, and that's all I'd have to do, and it would be great. As soon as you start having to pay the bills and put petrol in the car, that perspective changes a bit.
All right, so I can see that it's your passion, because going through all those challenges and so on, it must have tested you. What were some of the greatest challenges that you had to face?
Yeah, I think at first it was trying to break into the industry, trying to get yourself to a point where somebody would actually take a chance on you, because that's actually what you need, especially if you're a musician and you're trying to crack into the session scene. I needed a producer or an engineer to actually put my name forward and say, have you tried Bruce? I needed that break. And even after I got that recommendation, it then took another couple of years after that before I started getting further calls. I realized through that experience that I was actually quite ill prepared, and I wasn't actually good enough to really do this seriously. And that made me get back to the shredding some wood, and get practicing. And then I think by the next time that I was sort of invited to be involved in something, I think I did enough to get recognition, and then the word started to spread, and then before you know it, but it was a challenge at the beginning, and I understand that frustration. I get a lot of people calling me, and young people calling me, how do you break in? And it's really difficult to break in, that is the truth. And I just say to them, well, you've just got to keep persevering and chipping away at it until something gives, somewhere, if you're truly good, something will give. And you will have your foot in the door, and then it's what you make of that and where you go.
Most definitely. You've only given up when you give up. So
yeah, that's it. No, you can't give up. Yeah, the thing is, for me, it was also just a thing of like, I can't afford to give up. This is everything for me. It's everything I've tried to do my whole life. I think I was very fortunate, realizing at a very young age what I wanted to do, and that gives you a great deal of perspective, drive, and focus. In terms of, you were always going in one direction. I never was floating around and trying other things and options and trying to make money or try to start a business. I just wanted to pursue music. And I think once, if you persevere hard enough, if you're truly good, the other things start to follow you eventually.
Very profound. Right, so if you could go back, if you could see yourself back then, making all these mistakes, challenges, every day in and out, all that stuff, what sort of advice would you have given that person? What would you give that person?
Sure. Yeah, there's so many mistakes we make. The problem is, I guess, you have to make mistakes to learn from them, So I think for me, it's just my only word of encouragement to somebody would be, stay humble. Don't think too much of yourself. Think about how far you still can go and how much you can improve, and keep your eye on the ball, on the big picture, and strive for it with everything you can. Because I think if you have that kind of mentality, you will tend to progress and develop yourself to the point that you truly become valuable in the industry. Whereas if you sort of think you've got it all together, or you've got an attitude, or especially nowadays with the advent of Facebook and all the social media, anybody can pretend to be a rock star on social media. But to have the actual credentials to back it up is another story. So yeah.
So if also you could look at someone who's coming into the industry now at the moment, like what's the number one thing they have to do to become like really, really successful, to get their music out there, to get it monetized, and to get their performances going and all that?
Again, I think it's just a question of, you need to be honest with yourself and know that you truly have what it takes. I think you need a lot of character and tenacity to push through, because you will get a lot of doors closed in your face, a lot of disappointments, a lot of letdowns. You'll be replaced. You'll be, it can be quite demoralizing sometimes. But if you do believe in yourself and you do believe you really have got what it takes, I would say the key is to just really persevere and just believe in yourself and just to stop at nothing. But like I said, I also think you have to be realistic about your approach and what you're getting involved in. Is it sustainable? Are you pushing yourself into an area of the industry that is going to be worth giving everything you've got? So for example, I'm wary of, even though it's a lot of fun and it's a dream to be in the band and tour and play with a band, that's great. And if that goes well for you, fantastic. But the problem is what happens then when that all ends. If you haven't diversified enough, as I mentioned earlier, or you haven't got your finger in other pies, or you haven't managed to make a name for yourself beyond that, you could go down with the ship. But yeah, it's a tough question to answer, to be honest.
Alrighty. Also, what sort of new projects are you working on now at the moment, and what can we look forward to within the next few years?
I'm currently working on 4 albums at the moment. One of them is with an artist called Fritz de Groot, who was a classically trained guitarist who had a band called Hebron back in the day. He did about 6 albums. He's played at the Barcelona Olympic Games, I believe, and he was quite successful back in the day. He's one of the most creative people I know, and he's finally doing a solo album, and I'm working with that, which I'm excited with. I'm working on the 2nd album with Jason Bradley as well. Cool. There's a few other independent albums that I'm working with. I'm working with 2 twins called Telepathy that are youngsters that are up and coming, that I think have got a lot of potential. I'm very excited about that. That should be released at the end of this year as well. And then the other projects I'm involved in, I am involved in some Christmas productions, live album recordings at some churches in Pretoria, and also some music festivals, funny enough. I'm going to be musically directing a couple of music festivals next year. And so there's quite a few interesting things in the pipeline for me.
Well, you're a busy guy. So how can we get hold of you, and how can we buy some of your products and so on?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I don't really have a lot of products myself. Obviously, it's more what I work on that goes out there, so probably be more to do with the artists that I produce and the record labels that represent them. Yeah, I guess you could make contact on Facebook, or, just contacting me through any means if you wanted to get more information. But yeah, I think most of the products I do are out there or would be available, through the usual chains, social media and iTunes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us today, Bruce. It was very insightful listening to you speak. Hope to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Remember to catch us on our next episode, and as always, keep watching.